Remain standing for the jury.
Everybody be seated, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Back it up a little bit to ask a question. Most obvious question that should be asked out of all this. Why? It's an important question. Leads to answers. Why? If all that was said was true in Mr. Prince's argument, why did Henry Segura lie about being at the house on that day that many times? Why did Henry Segura set up an alibi with his phone knowing full well that he was at his house? Why? Why was her cell phone taken? The only thing out of this house that's been taken in this situation is her cell phone. Why? We're going to talk about that because it was incriminating against him. Why? Why is there only one void pattern in the blood spatter? One. A void pattern is a situation in which blood spatter is made and it is blocked by an object, specifically as we're talking about the person that perpetrated this event. There's only one void pattern. If there were more than one person, there would be more than one void spot, and there is not. There is one void pattern. Why is there only one shoe impression? FDLE and Mr. Knox testified that he saw patterns that he believed could possibly be shoe prints for further analysis. That analysis was done by Florida Department of Law Enforcement forensic specialists that is there to identify shoe wear and shoe wear impressions. And what he determined is all those other ones that Mr. Knox should have been processed and were processed were not shoe impressions. They were not footprints. One of them was. One. Why are all the wounds in one area? All of them are on her head and defensive. She has no lacerations. She's got no bruising. She has the gunshots, but she's got nothing from the beating except for in one spot, and that's her head. If you have multiple people doing this, you're going to get it in more than one spot. Otherwise, their hands are going to be to hit each other. If you get 2 or 3 people trying to beat her in the same spot, their hands are going to hit each other. And that's not what you have. There's going to be glancing blows. Why? And all of that means one person did it. One person, one void, one footprint, one location of the injuries. One person did it. What the attorneys, what I say, Mr. Prince says, is not evidence. What is said is relevant isn't simply relevant because it said so. Your job is to look through each and every piece of this evidence and make that determination yourselves. Not what Mr. Prince says and not what I say. And one of the most glaring examples of that is the text messages or the emails that you just saw. And you're going to get a copy of these to take back there, and you're going to copy of all of them. He left off the LOL in that response. He left off the fact that she wasn't going to do that because he wanted her to cover herself up because she's not Muslim. Ladies and gentlemen, these emails are all being sent by multiple persons, including Kayla. You got an opportunity to read them. They're in there. Including her boyfriend, Kayla. Mr. Santos got her information from Kayla in prison, undisputed. And she starts getting random emails, random letters, with random sayings throughout the letters, and she's concerned for her kids. Yeah, because she's got a random dude that's crazy in prison sending her emails, and she doesn't even know who he is. On November 12th, she's like, who is this dude? So is she fearful for her life because Santos is saying the stuff he's doing? Yeah. But not because she's in drug debt to him. But because she's a loving mother of three kids. And she's getting crazy person email. And she's getting crazy person mail. And even if you take what Mr. Prince said on its face, and notice he typed it out instead of showing you the actual emails. Even if you take it on its face, when she says, I'm not going to endanger my kid, wouldn't that also apply for all the time that she supposedly was running drugs for Mr. Santos? If she's not going to endanger your kid, is she likely to get involved in trafficking narcotics, driving to and from Texas and back with this person that she doesn't even know? For an email. No, she's not. Because again, the only reason that is even remotely a piece of evidence in front of you is because James Carlos Santos said so. Dr. Hudson's report. His statement suggests a grandiose sense of self-importance in which he exaggerates achievements and appears to be preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success and power based upon contentions he can influence from others, based upon the contentions he can influence others from prison to continue with their criminal exploits. Based upon his self-report during our interview and what can also be inferred from other information, he may be interpersonally exploitive, taking advantage of others to achieve his own ends. That's what he does. He takes advantage of people. He tries to get them to believe in things. I get y'all to believe in him. But it's just not true. And it's not true not because I say so, but because the evidence says so. Let's talk about some of the things Mr. Prince brought up. Jack McLean Park. Mr. Prince says, it's important. It's important because it's right there. Well, law enforcement did their job. They went out and they looked at it. They found out that it's cleaned out every day. Holiday fine, Thanksgiving, so the next day it will be. But not a week later. If it's simply proximity, do we also have to look at the trash cans at the fairgrounds? Do we have to look at the trash cans at the houses surrounding it? Do we have to look at the schools? The shirts were tested against DNA from 23 people, including the victims. Nothing. No evidence linking them at all. The investigation indicated it had been cleaned daily. No evidence at all. And finally, he says that there was a fire there, and that could have destroyed the DNA. I am not a fire expert, but I do know when you burn a white shirt, it turns black, and it gets burned. When you burn latex gloves, they melt. None of that was there. There was a fire at the bottom of the barrel, but not at the top where this stuff was deposited. There's nothing that links Jack McLean Park to this particular case, and the DNA testing proved it. And the follow-up investigation as to the relevance proved it. And common sense proves it. Marquise Davis, our dark SUV at 8:30. I saw the kids at 7:30. For some strange reason, there is a murder scene going on across the street from his house. Mr. Prince says he's got no motive to lie. I don't know why. But all I do know is it's not for 9 years, that he comes forward and gives this information. Doesn't tell law enforcement, doesn't tell law enforcement when they're interviewing his fiance, doesn't tell law enforcement when they're interviewing his stepson, doesn't tell law enforcement as they're all over this entire neighborhood that, hey, by the way, I saw a car in the driveway. Somehow 9 years later, he remembers very specifically about what he saw. I don't know why he's coming forward. All I know is they're not fiancé anymore. I don't know. But his testimony doesn't even agree with Law&Crime Timmons, because he says, I saw him at 5:45. Henry Segura, even through his own admission, says he was there at 8:15. Mr. Davis says, I know the time because I last saw him at 7:30. Then I loaded up my car and I drove all the way across town to give food to my dad, and then drove all the way back. And it was 8:30. Just doesn't make sense. It doesn't corroborate with anything else. Again, 9 years before he makes his claim. Is it possible he's confusing issues, confusing days 9 years later? Absolutely, 100%. I'm not saying he's lying. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying he doesn't know what he's talking about from 9 years ago as far as a specific day. Maybe he is lying, maybe he's not. But why on earth, if this was true, would you not tell law enforcement when you're in your house questioning your fiance and your soon-to-be stepson? I want you to believe the murders happened when the dogs were barking. First and foremost, witnesses say sound travels a lot at night. Every one of them. I know firearms. I know gunshots. We have 10 gunshots from this incident at 1 o'clock in the morning, and not a single one of them heard it. What does that tell you? It tells you dogs were barking at something. But there's nothing that indicates that it was involved in this particular homicide. Because if it was, they would have heard the gunshots too. Because that's what the dog would have been going nuts for, is all the problem that was going on at the house. The dog, if you follow the logic of this, the dog is going nuts because of everything that's going on there. And if that's true, this is all going on there, she gets out the door, heard 10 gunshots, and nothing. Reasonable doubt is not an imaginary, speculative, forced, or possible doubt. That is not what reasonable doubt is. And Mr. Prince tried to put an explanation on this, that reasonable outside the courtroom isn't the same as it is inside. Wrong. That is exactly why a jury of peers is chosen to perform the duties that you were chosen to do. Is because you are to bring those same reasonable aspects that you deal with every day that we talked about in jury selection, that we talked about earlier in the first, and to use those same things regarding the reasonableness of aspects and the reasonableness of doubt or not. That's why you are a jury of the peers. And when you apply that reasonableness to this, it is not an imaginary, speculative, forced, or possible doubt. You look at all of the evidence. Is the clothing the kids are wearing consistent with one? Tanaya, yeah. She's in her sleep attire. Javante, maybe, maybe not. Doesn't have a shirt on. And we're going to get into this a little bit and what it does tell us in a little bit. But let's take a look at Tamaya. Fully clothed. just like she would be on a normal basis. Is this consistent with 1 a.m.? Or is it consistent with it's starting to get time for the kids have to go to bed? And with 3 kids, you take turns giving them baths and getting ready and changing their clothes in order to go to bed. Tanaya would have gone first. She's in her bed attire. Javante, I would argue, is in the process of getting ready and getting ready for his bath. And then it will be Tamaya's turn, who is outside on the couch, because that's where the evidence shows us she was, because that's where she was shot and left her blood on the couch, fully clothed. Maybe the car that you saw was actually Henry Segura's, if he did in fact see one. Remember, we know Henry Segura got rid of a car. 3 days afterwards, get rid of the car. Why? Incriminating evidence. Everything else he got rid of was because it incriminated him. Same thing with the car. Mr. Paramore, 37-minute long recording in which Mr. Paramore makes one statement. The kids had to die because you can't leave witnesses. It's true. I don't think there's any question that's why the kids had to die. He's got common sense just along with everybody else. He certainly knows that. Greg Washington is Greg Washington. I don't know how else to describe it. You got to see him very briefly. But the bottom line is Greg Washington is a known snitch that just dack. And Investigator Bossio told you it was a 37-minute long audio in which Gregory Washington was just boom, 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 hammering away at him. Couldn't hear it. It's not audible, that's why you don't get to hear it. But he told you what it was. And finally, Paramore says something to get him to shut up, maybe. I don't know. But it's not an admission. It's not that I killed him. It's the kids had to die because of witnesses. It's common sense. It's true. Read this in the newspaper, I'd say the same thing. But more importantly, law enforcement then went on and they used their investigative tools and they ruled him out as a suspect. They didn't just call him in and say, "Hi, how you doing?" They ruled him out. They investigated him. He's not a witness. Again, just because Mr. Prince says it's the case doesn't mean it's not. With the evidence and the testimony of Sergeant Bossio, I think now Lieutenant Bossio, says we ruled him out as suspect through our investigative means. Says the motive is not there. It's not there because he knows how to deal with it already because of his other child. But he didn't. 4 months. Didn't do a damn thing. Didn't make a partial payment. Didn't go to court to try and get the settlement that he talked about earlier. The only thing we do know is he contacted Ms. Hawkins about getting rid of the child support on that child as well. And she's worked with him before. And they went to mediation and got it set aside. And keep in mind, he's already struggling for money. With the child support he's already got to pay. And now Brandy Peters is doubling it. So now when I don't have any money, my taxes are already being garnished. I can get the other Ms. Hawkins to settle this thing out, but I can't get Brandy. And now I got to pay more money. The other thing is Ms. Hawkins isn't taunting him like Brandy was. Most importantly, you cannot apply logic to an illogical person. And I say that because Mr. Segura is not logical in the things that he does. A logical person does not climb into a car with a gun, drive to Louisiana, Alabama, wherever it was, and get in a shootout to have his back of his cousin. That is not a logical response of somebody. That is someone who is okay with getting in a gunfight. And that's what he did. You cannot apply logic to an illogical person. And when you break it down, there is no one else that it makes sense committed this crime. There is no one else that has that motive and has a .32 revolver and was there on the day at the time. At some point, 1 + 1 + 1 = 3. He has each and every one of those. Now, the defense does not have to prove anything. Mr. Prince is absolutely 100% correct. They don't have to prove anything at all. It is solely upon the state to prove that Mr. Segura did this particular case. That being said, they did put testimony on about another theory. And when you're evaluating that, it is subject to the exact same weighing of evidentiary factors that you would give all the other evidence in the case. You've got two theories. The state says Henry Segura did it, and here's why. Mr. Santos says that this was a hit for a drug deal and put together an international hit squad. He gets a female to make sure she can open the door. He hires local help because they know the particular area. He gets the Mexican cartel involved, and he gets Mr. Avila to come over from Italy to also be involved in this for some reason. Mr. Santos, from prison, with his grandiose ideas and his narcissistic tendencies, and everything else that I'm not going to reiterate, puts together this international hit squad of 7 people to go over and kill Brandy Peters on the south side of Tallahassee. And in doing so, left one void pattern, one footprint, and one location of all the injuries. Use that common sense, use your intelligence. That does not make sense in any way, shape, or form and defies all logic and reasoning. And keep in mind, he did all of that without speaking a lick of Spanish. Doesn't speak Spanish. Mr. Noppinger, in making his evaluation of that the phone cradle, has to give third donor in order to get the results he did. We did that cross-examination. There has to be a third person in order to do so. There were absolutely no indications of a third donor. None. And I'm not going to rehash all the DNA stuff for the most part. But also keep in mind who you're talking about. Mr. Avila. Mr. Avila is a drug trafficker. But is he a drug trafficker in the manner in which Mr. Prince is putting him forth? Where he's an international part of an international hit squad? Remember, not all these things are saying. He's from Colombia, the epicenter of cocaine. This is where this guy's from. He's a poor fisherman that is out there trying to do and make a living. He's trying to put his kids through college. You heard his testimony. Fishing dries up. He needs money. It's Colombia. Who do you think comes calling? He's a fisherman. He knows how to run a boat. We need you to make this run from 300 miles off of Peru to 300 miles off of Acapulco, Mexico. That's it. Never brought drugs into the United States. Never been part of a drug Narcos, Miami Vice, any of those things. He simply got on a boat and he made sure it got to where it was from one coordinate to another in order to get the money. Not something you should have done, but does that make him part of an international hit squad put together by James Santos to come kill Brandy Peters on the south side of Tallahassee? Keep in mind, Mr. Santos, tall, skinny Colombian. Mr. Avila, 5'6", not skinny. Not fat, not skinny. Doesn't even match. Mr. Santos, I met him well, depending on which story it is, I met him at a strip club outside of Atlanta in 2000, 2001. Mr. Avila is in prison during that time period. Mr. Santos is actually in prison during part of that time period. Mr. Santos says, I also met him in Texas in 2001. Again, Mr. Avila is in prison during that time period. The only reason Santos knows Mr. Avila's name is because it came forth in the hearing that you heard about regarding CODIS. And we'll get to CODIS in a little bit. So he throws the name out there, trying to make sure, see if the court and everybody else will bite on his grandiose ideas. Trying to make a name for himself, make him sound like he's somebody. Yet all of this, if Mr. Avila is in fact, and he's told, we need your DNA because of the scene of Tallahassee, he knows what the crime is, and despite that, he agrees to get on a train and travel from his home in Italy to the U.S. Embassy. The U.S. Embassy, sovereign U.S. soil, where all of the laws of the United States apply. And he's going there as a suspect of murder. And he gives his DNA. But we're not done. He gives his DNA, it goes back and it's analyzed, and we'll get to the analysis in a little bit. He then returns 3 years later again to sovereign U.S. soil after giving his DNA to cooperate further. He provides his documentation about him paying his rent and his students, being a student. Is that someone who's part of an international hit squad? Is that part of the actions of someone who is an international hit squad? Again, going back, Mr. Knobbinger needs a third donor to make Mr. Avila's DNA fit. Miss Brown, 2 donors, is her determination back in 2011. You heard from Dr. McElfresh. There's nothing here that indicates there's a third-party donor. Joe Allen Brown determines the 2 donors. You would expect to see a 5th peak if there was, in fact. And you're going to have these electrophorograms. If you want to go back and look at them, fine. I'm not going to do a whole lot here with them. But the bottom line is there wasn't. There were 4 peaks. And when you look at them, she found in 2011 that the minor was a 14-17 at VWA, which is the loci. Minor 14-17, major 15-18. Avila is a 17-18. He doesn't match the 14. Ms. Brown says, oh, well, I included it, the kids in there. They could have been in there, so therefore I went ahead and included them in this. But she also excluded them. You can't rule someone out from being a DNA sample and then turn around and come back and put them back in to get the results you want. Say what you want. There was an issue. She did absolutely correct in doing the CODIS thing and notifying the state attorney's office. She was trying her best to see that we could get any kind of results in a lead. Absolutely 100% correct. Unfortunately, she was then asked last week to do an analysis. And she changed everything. She changed her own recorded notes and she added back in persons that had been excluded to get the DNA result that she wanted to prove herself right. Because when you look at the raw material, Mr. Avila is not a 14 and neither is Brandy. And there's only two people that are part of this. The minor donor, as she said back then, is a 14 and a 17. And Mr. Avila is not. Back then, she said the minor is at 8 and 9. He's not. It just doesn't fit what her determination as to what the minor was back in 2011. Further, Dr. Kevin McElfresh. I know you heard a lot from DNA people. Dr. McElfresh literally is the person that helped create DNA forensic analysis as we know it, that is used by everybody. He's been doing this for 30 years. He does it for the Department of Defense, Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. He did it for September 11th. He did it for the tsunami in Indonesia. He works with low quantity and complex mixtures as his daily routine, the way that FDLE does the more simple stuff. This is why he specializes in this, and this is why he was contracted. And make no mistake, it wasn't told, hey, by the way, can you see if Henry Segura is in this DNA mixture? It was, what does this DNA mixture tell you? And when he went back and looked, he looked first and foremost, of course, at that Avila DNA. He's not there. He's not there because there's no sign of a third donation, and he's not a 14, he's not a 7-8 at all those other loci. You cannot, and he went on to tell you, you cannot exclude somebody in an analysis and then go back and include them at a later time in order to try and mess with the DNA data. And that's what was happening. That's what Mr. Knoppinger and that's what Ms. Brown said. Fine. I'm also well aware, good Lord, we've heard all this stuff about DNA. I'm not going to believe anything they say. Fine. Don't believe anything they say. If you don't believe anything they say on this particular piece of evidence especially, that means that Avila's not there. Because you're certainly not going to believe Mr. Santos. But if you are going to believe it and use your own skills and those things that you were taught about DNA, and look at those electropherograms if you want to, Mr. Avila's DNA is not there. Dr. McElfresh went one step farther. He was asked to look at that grab bar. And that grab bar, you do know, is in fact an integral part of this crime. And you know that because right next to it is Brandy Peters' blood. That means whoever beat her put their hand or some other object right there, right where we're doing this analysis. We also know it because the kids are found at this location. So this isn't a question about DNA that was left at some other time by some other persons that are mixtures, complex mixtures. We talked about DNA can be left at any particular time. Sometimes DNA is mixed 2-3 days beforehand, can mix with one that's done right away. That's just the way these things mixture. You can get through touch, you can get through sweat, you can get through all different ways for this DNA. But we know this right here is left at the time that these kids were killed and Miss Peters was killed. We also know that Henry Segura wouldn't be touching this. And he said Henry Segura is there and part of that mixture. And the one thing that sets this aside from a telephone cradle is, when asked, Joe Ellen Brown, both on the stand and in 2011, said, I cannot exclude Henry Segura from this DNA sample. Because FDLE protocols do not let me. Mr. Knoppinger, I cannot exclude Henry Segura from this DNA sample. Mr. Bundy, I cannot exclude Henry Segura from this DNA sample. Dr. McElfresh, the specialist in this field, the father of this science, who was involved in all the studies that started this, can do DNA analysis that, quite frankly, they can't because of his knowledge and his abilities. And he says it's him. It is entirely consistent with all of the DNA persons. Mr. Knox goes back with 20/20 vision. He looks at stuff and says, TBD should have done this, TBD should have done that. Yet even he still misses stuff. And we talked about one of the first things he said out of the box was nobody swabbed or nobody went and checked for fingerprints on that window that's there in the master bathroom. But it was. So even he misses stuff. But let's talk about what it is that he did find. He did say yes, a revolver with all the different shapes and all the different areas on it could have caused each and every one of these injuries. Dr. Flanagan, the medical examiner, said the same thing, that these wounds could be caused by a revolver with all the different trigger guards, hammers, barrels, end of barrels, sights. You have a picture of one. In the butt of the gun could have absolutely 100% caused that 1-inch indentation. That's what they said. That's what the evidence said. That's what the testimony of every one of these persons said. Mr. Knox says you can't make a determination of one person versus multiple persons. And I went through stuff. If there are a hit squad, international hit squad, remember what we're talking about is Henry Segura, international hit squad, 7 persons. If there's an international hit squad, how on earth does Miss Peters get out of the master bathroom? Then, even after getting out of the master bathroom, how does she get out of the master bedroom? You're telling me one of those 7 persons can't block either one of those exits? If that's true, how on earth does she manage to get all the way down the hallway, through the living room, and out the front door if you've got 7 people there to commit this crime? And what he told you is there's one void pattern. One. Not 6, not 5, not 4, not 3, not 2. One. Consistent with one person. There's one footprint. He saw all those other 5 spots there that could possibly be shoe impressions. All he knew was they were a pattern of indiscriminate origin. And there's one motive. And finally, there's, again, all the wounds are in one area. Impressions of an unknown origin. That's what we're talking about. He said there's 5 of them there. They need to be further analysis. His expertise is not identifying footprints. Remember that. Your instructions say an expert can testify and give their opinion on that in which they are an expert in, and that alone. What he is an expert in is crime scene analysis and developing things for further examination by Florida Department of Law Enforcement or whatever expert it is that can testify as it relates to that analysis. And what he said is that stuff that I probably would have processed, which TBD did. And when they did that processing, and they sent it to Florida Department of Law Enforcement and the shoe print analyst, Mr. Mamoni, and he did that comparison, what did he determine? One shoe print. All the other ones were a pattern of indiscriminate nature. And keep in mind where this is found. It's the entryway of the home. People are going to walk through there. These weren't shoe prints that were found, and you can just see right in here. They were developed because they had to do extra light stuff and the purple stuff. And it brought out footprints that were there. So these weren't bloody footprints that Mr. Knox tried to identify. These were things that were found and footprints that were identified through further analysis in order to bring these footprints out. And shockingly enough, they found footprints, potential footprints, in the foyer, where everybody walks through to get into the house. Not anywhere else, just that one spot. And again, they weren't shoe prints. One of them was. They were impressions that could possibly be shoe prints, but they were undetermined as to what those origins were. That's what the expert said. And there's one void pattern right here, where he is beating her. And he is beating her right here and casting that stuff off as he's beating her. And it goes up underneath the drape, which is right where you saw where the pictures are. So when you take that, and you take those two theories, and you look at how it actually applies to the evidence, and you analyze it, and you look at Mr. Segura's testimony, lied to his wife, lies to the kids, lied to Tallahassee Police Department, lied to his girlfriends, lied to God. I'll never cheat on my wife again. Months later, he's doing it already. Yet he wants you to believe he's going to tell you the truth. We're back to that first question. Why was the cell phone taken? The only thing that's taken out of the house. Why the cell phone? There is no other reason to take that but to hide the information that is on it. Because it's taken off nobody's taking it to use it later on. Shortly after the murders, 8/21, it's off the grid. Why was the cell phone taken? Because it gives indications and tells who she's talking to the day of the murders. It's got. This is a person that is well aware of the incriminating aspects of these cell phone records. Hides his phone from him. Doesn't tell him about that number. Star 67s her to keep her from knowing where it is. He's gone back and deleted each and every one of the incriminating emails so that law enforcement can't see them. Why was the cell phone taken? Because it would have pointed the finger and showed that the person that she was talking to immediately before the murders and talking to on that day was Henry Segura. It's the only reason and the only explanation as to why it would be that that phone was taken. Mr. Segura gets up there and says, she was cool with it on Wednesday. Again, Mr. Segura says that. If that's the case, why is she calling Department of Revenue hotline on that same day? The testimony was. Why is she calling Department of Revenue hotline on that day trying to find out where her money was? So Wednesday she was cool. We know that's not true. I was at her house for sex. Why? We're back to that question. Why is he coming in and telling you? Because he knows what the evidence is. He's listened to the same testimony you have. He's reviewed all the evidence. They had John Sawicki. And he knows he has to have an explanation. So he comes in and tells you what he tells you. And he tells you, I didn't say it because I didn't want Malika to know. Yet he also tells you, I love those girls, Tamaya and Tanaya. He loved them so much he couldn't set that aside on a homicide investigation? Doesn't make any sense. He didn't have a problem confessing his Wednesday visit to Brandy. He didn't have a problem telling law enforcement officers about his other girlfriends. Second video, they confront him with him. He's like, yeah, I've got girls all over. I used that second phone. I don't remember the name of it. I got rid of it before Brandy Peters was killed. I used that to talk to him. Yet he doesn't say, oh yeah, by the way, I was also at her house before we had sex. She was alive when I left. No. The only time that comes out is because he's awaited trial and he knows he can't stick to that story because the cell phone analysis blows that entire story out. Mr. Princess eviscerates his argument. Compare his statement to the other evidence. No condom wrapper. People flush condoms after they're used, yes. Typically not a condom wrapper. Same kid. No DNA there, no indication of sex. Maybe he did use a condom for the first time. Said he waited at the church for mom to leave and he walked down the street, but then back through the yard. Kids were playing outside, they didn't see him. Cece didn't see him. Archon, when he went over to go get the kids, didn't see him. Remember, Archon went over to the house to get the kids out of the house to bring them over for oxtail soup. He didn't see him. But he was inside having sex with Brandy, is what he's telling you. His information doesn't comport with what the evidence is. Mr. Segura says, in his testimony, he never really even referred to Javante as his kid. I don't know if he knows that or not. He says, I would have stayed and waited 4 hours to have sex with her. I would have waited all night long. Yet he can't drive across town to see these kids that he supposedly loves so much? He says he left around 8:30, 8:15. When I was getting ready for this case, I was reading a book, and it's one of my favorite authors, named John Sanford. He's got a hero in this particular book that talks about, and he's obviously a cop, and he goes out and he's involved in this investigation, U.S. Marshal, and he arrests somebody based upon cell phones. And I'm reading this as I'm getting ready for this case. It says, if you're a crook and you leave your phone at home while you're sticking up a bank, but you carried it all the other times, you automatically look suspicious. You always carry a phone. And the one time during that bank robbery, you left it at home, sooner or later some prosecutor will convict somebody of something because he didn't have a phone in his pocket. That was interesting. Because that's what we have. When we look at these cell phones, Brandy Peters always has her cell phone on her. There are no more gaps where she's let the phone die, where she's let the phone leave the network, where she hasn't plugged it back in for charging, where it hasn't been utilized in one way, shape, or another. There just aren't. For a week prior, it's constant communication. The phone is always charged, it's always on, and it's always being used. always on, always charged, always being used, except for that time. When not only did the cell phone analysis of Henry Segura's phone that he did not tell law enforcement about, and now it's come and admitted to you. That's the time that it stops. So what did happen? No way to truly be sure about how things went down in the house. But I ran through a scenario with Mr. Knox. He begrudgingly, he's a defense witness, begrudgingly admitted that it was fully within his analysis that it went down this way. About halfway through, his demeanor kind of changed a little bit, and he kind of realized where we were going with this line of questioning. True to his integrity, he admitted it was there, but you could see the look on his face. Y'all witnessed it. As I talked to him about the way that this could happen. So you follow the evidence. You use your common sense. You use that education. Use the education that you've got over the last 2 weeks. And look in the facts and come to a reasonable conclusion. And what they tell you is that Brandy Peters is harassing Henry Segura. I want the I want the child support money. Give me the child support money. I'm going to take the money out of your taxes. I'm going to garnish your wages. He forwarded them on to Malika, his wife. Understandably, she's getting frustrated too. This is a child he does not believe to be his. He's repeatedly requested on 2 different occasions to have Department of Revenue do a paternity test because he doesn't believe the kid is his. Does not believe Javante is his. And she is pestering, Department of Revenue is pestering him. And they are hitting him with letter after letter after letter after letter after letter. So now he's got his wife upset with him because he's got another kid and cheated on her again, despite his promise to God that he wouldn't do it. He's got Brandy hitting him hard. Where's my money? He's getting letter after letter after letter. We saw the first one earlier, June 22nd, 2010, in which he filed for that petition, not believing that he was his child. And now we are here on November 3rd, 2010, 2 weeks before the homicide occurred, with this last letter from Department of Revenue. And they give him a response. November 3rd, 2010. You must respond within the next 14 days. Which happens to coincide with that Wednesday visit on November 17th to Brandy Peters, and happens to also coincide with her phone call, Department of Revenue, inquiring where the money is, that he says she's cool with. And what we know is that week he goes to Tyra Wilcoxson and he asks for a gun. And what we know is he did in fact go to see Brandy on that 17th day. Why? Same thing you did with Miss Hawkins. Hey baby, get rid of the child support. I can take care of you, get rid of the child support. But she's not having enough. She's not having it. She says no. And he goes back on November the 19th with his 32 that Calvin Moore seen him with, that he even admits he had. He says he got rid of it, but he says he had it. And he's got enough ammunition to actually reload the gun. And he goes, and he probably parked up here at the church, just like you said. It's how you hide lies. You mix truth in. And he parks up at the church, and he walks down to 908 Saddle Creek Run. And he knocks on the door, or even maybe even opens the door. He's been there before. They know who he is. And he walks in and he finds Tamaya on the couch. Nobody's alarmed, it's Henry. She sits there with her back to him, doing her studies or whatever it is she's reading here. Maybe he expects the children to be there, maybe not. We heard from Monica Peters that they normally aren't there on that Friday night, but they were. And he pulls out the gun, and he shoots her in the back of the head, and she falls right there where she sat. Brandy in the back bedroom watching TV. We've seen the video. All the lights in the house are off, remember, with the exception of the bathroom and the couple of TVs. The house lights are off, would indicate it's probably daylight outside whenever all this stuff goes down. But what we know is Brandy probably sticks her head out the door and says, "What the hell was that?" Sees Henry Segura, runs back into her bedroom, and he gives chase. And we know there's a struggle for the gun. I would argue that it happened right in this area. Struggle for the gun, gets a shot downward through her breast. Another shot goes out the window. There's a further struggle. She retreats into the bathroom. Shoots twice into the bathroom. One through the doorway, right here, and one that hits the shower stall. We talked a little bit earlier about this. About these two trajectory lines and how close that was to the wall. And you can look at the trajectory rod, and it's pointing this way back towards the wall and upwards. Can we determine somebody was left-handed or right-handed? Not necessarily, but for that to be shot with a right hand, the person would have to be up against the wall shooting along these lines, or like this. Or left-handed. Up against the wall, bang. Running out, pivots, and shoots. We have two shots in there. The shot out the wall. Again, it's consistent with someone being left-handed. Mr. Segura's left-handed. So she's able to escape both the bathroom and the master room out into the hallway. At this point, the gun's probably out of ammo. She's been shot at least one time, probably more than that. Other shots have been taken as well. He's got to stop and reload. She runs out this doorway. She collides with the doorway right here from that injury that she got on the left shoulder, leaving the blood. And she runs down the hallway while he's reloading that gun. He reloads, gets a shot at her. She manages to get outside. Not really plausible if there's 7-person hit squad there. Keep in mind, this 7-person hit squad was Mexican cartel. Mexican cartel 1 likely to use a .32 caliber gun, which is an old police gun, or are they more likely to use a semi-automatic gun like a 9mm 45, something much more common? Are they likely to put the wrong ammunition in the gun? If this is an international hit squad that knows how to kill people, what's the likelihood of them not knowing how to kill people? So she's able to get outside, and he pulls her back in. And he beats her to death. Now, Tanaya and Javante, during all this domestic situation, they went into hiding. Javante, with the clothes that he had on, consistent with Tanaya already being the person that has taken a bath and getting ready for bed. Javante's next in line, and he's taken off his shirt, he's got his pants still on, But he's next in line for the bathtub, so the bath has already been run. And he's in there, and that's where they hid. And that's where Henry Segura found him afterwards. And he drowned him. And he held him under there for 10 to 20 seconds after they breathed in the water. Once they're dead, he then goes back out in the living room, takes Tamaya, carries her into the bathroom, and puts her there with her sister and brother. Mr. Segura realizes the phone has incriminating information on him, and he goes back and gets it, and he leaves to the back door, locking the bottom lock only, and not the top. Gets to his car, then he starts erasing the evidence. Gets rid of the emails, he gets rid of the bloody gloves, the bloody, remember what Silas Thornton told you about the clothing that they wear is protective. Sticker stuff is what they have as welders. He gets rid of all of that stuff as he goes down to Silas Thornton's house the next day, totally out of the blue. Hey, by the way, I'm in the neighborhood of Sop Chopping. I'm gonna swing by. Mr. Thornton told you that was out of the ordinary. What's down there? Sop Chopping River. A whole bunch of woods. A lot of places to dispose stuff. So he goes down there and he does that. And he destroys the evidence, both the electronic as well as the other pieces of evidence that he had that would incriminate him. Law enforcement, where's your phone? I was home all day. And when you look at all the evidence, and you apply that common sense and that intelligence, and you look at those two theories that presented to you, only one of them makes sense, and only one of them has the motive, the means, and the opportunity. And the other one is James Santos. And based solely on James Santos. And you have the reports back there. So when you do all of that, I'm confident that you'll take a look at this, and you'll find that he is in fact guilty of the murder of Randy Peters, Maya Peters, Tanaya Peters, and Javante Segura. And ladies and gentlemen, it cannot be lost that today is the 9th anniversary of these murders. It has been a long, frustrating procedure. Make no mistake, the family members are asking you, and everybody's asking you to return a verdict of guilty and seek justice for these children on that night.
That's not an appropriate comment. The jury disregarded that comment